We are beginning with Laws of the Soul, webinar commentary number 19. We're on page 154, and we finished the introduction to the Law of Repulse. Now we are working with what is called here the Law of Repulse and Desire, to see their relation with each other. The section with which we have now to deal will concern itself specifically with the major problem of humanity. Is that desire? Is that the problem of desire which the Buddha came to remedy? Let us see. We shall, however, touch upon it most briefly, and will deal particularly with the aspect of it which shifts from the problem as it concerns the aspirant to the problem of the disciple. Underlying the entire psychological problem of humanity as a whole lies that major attitude towards existence which we characterize as desire. This is really a Buddhist formulation, isn't it? The Buddha, with his sixth ray mind, came to help humanity solve this problem of desire. So, underlying the entire psychological problem, that which keeps the human being from being an integrated, harmoniously functioning unit within the planetary process, the entire psychological problem of humanity as a whole lies that major attitude towards existence, which we call desire. We might call it perhaps the attraction for the not-self. All lesser complexities are based upon and subservient to, or are emergent from, this basic urge. By a problem, we mean something that does not flow, something that sustains a cleavage, which prevents a particular system from functioning as it should. It involves friction, the possibility of disassembly of the system. It involves the possibility of a breakdown, really. Freud calls this urge sex, which is nevertheless only another name for the impetus of the attraction for the not self. I capitalize the word self here because I think we're talking about that eventual interior orientation towards the true point upon the higher mental plane, where the monad is focused as the ego. At least that's the first other than personal self within our own system that we recognize. So the word sex has to be understood in a larger term, only another name for the attraction for the not self. And, well, I suppose it has its psychological dimensions too, but especially the physical dimension is emphasized with this word. Other psychologists speak of the dominant activity as the wish life. Here we come into an astral meaning, and we find Mars involved with its promptings, and Neptune especially with its emotional promptings. Other psychologists speak of the dominant activity as the wish life of humanity, and account for all allied characteristic tendencies, all emotional reactions, and the trend of the mental life, especially this trend of the mental life when dealing with Kama Manas, in terms of the underlying wishes, longings, and acquisitive aspirations as defense mechanisms or ways of escape from the inevitability of environing conditions. So it's as if wishes remove our consciousness from environing conditions, or we long to be rid of these hampering conditions. So this dominant attraction for the not-self, or for that which is other than one's true inner essence, is called the wish life, and account for all allied characteristic tendencies, all emotional reactions toward and away from, and the trend of mental life when we have certain desires to learn about things mentally and our thoughts take a certain line of development according to our wishes, we are told. They account for all this in terms of the underlying wishes, longings, and acquisitive aspirations as defense mechanisms and ways of escape. Well, we're dealing with the relationship between the physical conditions and how the astral vehicle and the visions arising therein would have those conditions other than they are, because they fail to be satisfying. To these longings and wishes and the labor incident to their fulfillment, and what human being is not, average human being anyway, is not driven by the labor to fulfill that which the imagination indicates is possible and is other than what is. All men give their lives. Even in the sacrifice pedal number 3, the sacrifice is in the first tier. The sacrifice is for the sake of obtaining that which does not yet exist on the physical plane, and men sacrifice themselves for it. Men give their lives. So this is related to the pedal of sacrifice. Pedal of sacrifice. And everything done is an effort to meet the realized need. The need is sort of like the distance between that which the imagination reveals and that which the senses reveal. The need is the distance between that which the imagination reveals as possible and that which the senses reveal as actual. Well, perhaps it's not a need, but it's certainly when that distance involves something which is indispensable to life, then I suppose it's a need. But oftentimes it's simply a want. A wanting that things be other than they are. Because somehow the vision of what things could be is instilled in the astral body by the soul. And one always realizes that there is a dissonance between that vision, soul-inspired vision, however attenuated it might be, and that which the senses reveal. And everything is done in an effort to meet the realized need to face the challenge of existence with the challenge of existence, which can be conditions, well, let's just call them threatening conditions as they are, or stultifying conditions, with the demand for happiness, for heaven, and for eventual fulfillment of the hoped-for idealized state. See, this is the, we live in the Saturnian world where Jupiterian fulfillment is not found. And the desire nature is that which reaches out towards the vision, the soul-inspired vision of fulfillment, even if it doesn't look like it's from the soul. It comes from the soul. The soul is that great rounded out entity on the higher mental plane, which is the very symbol of fulfillment. And the causal body, the egoic lotus, eventually becomes spherically, coloristically, tonally fulfilled. So there is a reaching out towards the fullness that is possible, as indicated by the soul with the visions that inspires in the astral body. To face the challenge of existence with the demand for happiness, for heaven, and for eventual fulfillment of the hoped-for ideal state. So we do not live in an ideal state. We live in what's called them actual conditions, which are far from the vision which the higher nature inspires in the psychological nature of man, in his Kama-manus. And that drive for fulfillment comes finally from the monad itself, and from the soul as the representative of the monad. So there is here what we call divine discontent, no arrangement in the lower world is sufficient forever. It may bring a temporary sense of fulfillment, but always the spirit indicates that there is more, and the desired nature helps us envision that more and animates the mechanism to attempt to reach that more and to make that more a reality upon the lowest plane. You know, then, of course, once that happens, then after a while you say, well, now what? Now what? And people who have apparently reached the height of their previously intended fulfillment commit suicide. They just think there's nothing else. Well, let's just say that their contact with the soul and their imagination lacks in that respect. You know, they answer yes to the question, is this all there is? When in fact a resounding no should be the answer, and the imagination, spurred on by the soul, should give that vision to the consciousness, which indicates the nature of that more. Everything is governed by some form of urgency. You know, we see you see here the word urge, some sort of urgency towards satisfaction, and satisfaction is a let's just say it's an experienced arrangement closer to the underlying motivating archetype. So everything in our life is governed by some form of urgency towards satisfaction, and this is distinctive of man's search at every stage of his development, whether it is the instinctive urge to self-preservation, i.e. the thought that being what we call alive is better than being dead, which can be seen in the savage's search for food or in the economic problems of modern civilized man. We might say that the economic problem does drive on to greater development, because that problem must be solved through the use and development of one's inherent faculties. So everything is governed by some form of urgency. We all have desires. What are they? Are they high? Are they low? What do they lead to? What constellation of factors would find those desires fulfilled? So this is distinctive, this urgency, distinctive of man's search at every stage of his development, whether we're dealing with the savage or the saint, whether it is the instinctual urge for self-preservation, to self-preservation, which can be seen in the savage's search for food, or in the economic problems of modern civilized man. How do we live and make a living so we can live? Whether it is the urge to self-reproduction, so that one may have a kind of giving a kind of immortality through one's offspring, and the satisfaction of that appetite, which works out today in the complexity of the sex life of the race, involving so many emotional and mental factors that, really we could say it's psychological complexity. Whether it is the urge to be popular, loved, and esteemed, we see this in so many performers, don't we? These are the Maslow's esteem needs. Whether it is the urge for intellectual enjoyment and the mental appropriation of truth, let's say that which drives the philosopher, or the deep-seated desire for heaven and rest, which characterizes what we call the world-weary Christian who has struggled onward through this vale of tears, or the aspiration for illumination, which is the demand of the mystic. Notice how the will begins to enter here. It's my right, I demand it. Or the longing for identification with reality, which is the wish of the occultist. Oh, I find myself wanting that. How about you? Identification with reality. Identification seems to be the real return after wandering in ignorance to the being, the re-becoming of what one actually is. All this is desire in some form or another, and we really have to realize that. Sometimes when we begin to talk about spiritual things, we fancy we are beyond the prompting of desire, and it is not so. All this is desire in some form or another, and by these urges, humanity is governed. We might say the urge towards what? This will be seen as the stratification of the quality of desire. By these urges, humanity is governed and controlled. I would say most definitely controlled, for this is only a simple statement of the case. We have these promptings, these drives, these urges, and to what extent do we just allow everything we know ourselves to be to go with them and attempt to fulfill them? Or to what extent do we say, here is a desire, and I am independent of that desire. But of course these desires in a way are really promptings of our higher nature, drives of our higher nature. So we might say, to the extent that desires are drives and promptings from our higher nature, they must be fulfilled. They are kind of fiery energy propelling us, propelling the unit towards that which the higher nature and visions. There is this drive that keeps us going. Sometimes people have the sense of the loss of faith or the loss of that drive, and they sit in a somewhat immobile, depressed state. But then maybe they say, oh, the Holy Spirit has revived my soul again. I'm remembering that old spiritual. There is a balm in Gilead that makes the wounded whole. There is a balm in Gilead which heals the sin-sick soul. Sometimes I feel discouraged and think my work's in vain, but then the Holy Spirit revives my soul again. So this inner fire, this inner drive that comes from the divine dimensions of life propels us. It's well to understand the stream, the current which carries us forward. Once we have entered the stream, we might as well take advantage of it, because it is a propelling river of fire leading us to fulfillment, as that fulfillment is understood from the higher perspectives. It is this realization of man's fundamental bias or controlling factor, that's what he's calling desire, he's calling it man's fundamental bias or controlling factor, that lies behind the teaching given by the Buddha, and which is embodied in the Four Noble Truths of the Buddhist philosophy. Of course, you have to have realized what desire is just a little bit to ascribe, to even care to understand those Four Noble Truths. There are many religionists who just don't want to. They're so in the grip of desire without understanding that it is desire that they don't want to turn their consciousness to the analysis of what desire is. So these it's this realization that's behind, the realization of this fundamental bias or controlling factor that one is in the grip of desire lies behind the teaching given by the Buddha concerning the Four Noble Truths, which can be summarized as the following way. There are various summaries of these truths, but these truths are something that each one of us should carry in our understanding and perhaps be able to repeat when caught up in the desires of life and the various impulsions that we feel without knowing whence their source. Existence in the phenomenal universe is inseparable from suffering and sorrow. And here we have to, what is the phenomenal universe? Phenomenal. P-H-E. Path of Higher Evolution. That won't do it. Phenomenal. P-H-E-N. Well, maybe not. So I want to make that little addition. It should be there. P-H-E-N-L. And we'll call this phenomenal. Okay. So phenomenal universe is, for practical purposes, the lower 18 subplanes. Basically the dense physical body of the planetary logos, or maybe even the 21 lower subplanes, which we might consider, well, certainly are, as we are given, the dense physical vehicle of the solar logos. Now, maybe from a cosmic perspective, higher, the phenomenal universe is the entire lower 18 cosmic subplanes, and at least the cosmic physical plane. But for practical purposes, and given where man is right now and what his immediate salvation will be after the fourth degree, we can consider it to be the dense physical body of the solar logos, the breaking of the causal body, which releases from the lower 21 subplanes. So there's going to be sorrow, pain, division, separation, lack of cohesion, lack of the realization of unity in this lower and apparently much divided world. Because pain and cleavage go together, it seems this is a world inseparable from cleavage. The cause of suffering is desire, there we go, for existence in the phenomenal universe, as if to say, you know, let me live in these lower 18 subplanes forever. This is where I want to be. I don't want to leave it, and certainly I want to come back. I don't want to leave it by dying, and certainly if I die, I want to come back to it through rebirth. So if we have desired to perpetuate our existence interminably in these lower 18 worlds and even 21 worlds, because that has to be given up to the causal body, then we will suffer from seemingly unbridgeable cleavages, ongoing separation, the lack of the joy of unity and the bliss of oneness. The cessation, Buddha is really practical. You know, his Taurus, when you read his, that which his students took down concerning what he said, he is clarity itself, simplicity itself. I guess the story goes that in his training he mastered all the complexities and decided that for the redemption of humanity, to which he was as the head of the hierarchy at the time, think of it, to which he was committed, simplicity was best. The cessation of suffering is attained by eradicating desire for phenomenal existence in the lower 1821 worlds. It's if we want this kind of existence, we will suffer. The suffering is inextricably connected to the desire for existence in the lower worlds. You can see that there would be higher correspondences to this, but you know, we're simply human beings here, so we'll take it one step at a time. And the path to the cessation of suffering is the Noble Eightfold Path, differently expressed in different translations and endlessly interpreted in all of the great Buddhist thought form. Buddhism is a rational religion. It involves the mind. It is really the religion of those who come from the moon chain, whose monad is more on the third ray. And I think that those who have an antagonism towards Buddhism do not have the same monadic structure and are more likely to be younger in their soul expression and less inclined in religious matters to use the rational intellect, and especially that intellect when illumined by the higher dimension. So if we have existence in these 21 subplanes, it is suffering. Suffering and sorrow will be found in these worlds, because in a way we are separated in these worlds from the real program of the second solar system. We are dwelling in the worlds which are recomposites in a way of the matter of the previous solar system. So we're separated in our vibration from what we're really supposed to be doing, getting on with the themes of this solar system, which are all about unity. And the cause of suffering, you know, the will in a way is driving towards the second solar system program, but the desire looks backward and is a rending process The cause of the suffering is the desire for existence in those lower worlds, and the cessation of the suffering comes with eradicating the cause, which is the desire for that kind of existence. And the specific path to the cessation of suffering is the Noble Eightfold Path. And I think he's going to, well, maybe he's going to deal with that here. But certainly it's completely accessible. It's, it's a bit like being in the AA program and you memorize the 12 steps, right? And of course you have to work the steps. You can't just say, oh, I know the steps, so therefore I've done the program, and therefore, oh, I know the Noble Eightfold Path, and therefore I have graduated from what Buddhism can teach me. In other words, the teaching of the great being, the Buddha. Not at all. It's not sufficient. We have to work each one of the steps in the Noble Eightfold Path, and they're all preceded by the word right. Do it right. Do it correctly. Doing something is not enough. It has to be done correctly. So we'll see if we get into that. This is probably not news to you, because so many of you who are studying this are really in the spiritual field and have been for a long time, some of you. So it will be familiar. But we're interested here in the Tibetans' analysis of that which has long been taught in various religions, and at this point the Buddhist religion. So this is about the Buddha. It was the realization of the urgency of man's need to be delivered from his own desire nature, which led, this is about the Christ rather, which led the Christ to emphasize the necessity to seek the good of one's neighbor in contradistinction to one's own good. So let's just say our desire nature truly has us in prison, but so many of us do not realize it. So, when the Christ looked ahead, well, he was, after all, the world teacher at his time of appearing. We do have to remember, this distinction between Jesus and the Christ, and I think a very parallel thing between Gautama and the real Buddha. Prince Siddhartha Gautama and the real Buddha. For 2,500 years, I think, the fifth degree initiate, who was the head of the planetary hierarchy, and the inability to see Christ as Lord Maitreya as distinct from the now Master Jesus, or the initiate Jesus at that time, is exactly parallel to the inability to see the great Buddha as distinct from his vehicle, Gautama. Now, I don't recall that this has been mentioned. It may just be my own wild theory, but it seems perfectly rational to me. It seems to me correct how these great beings, who are the head of the hierarchy, work to save time. They use the vehicle of their well-trained instrument. And being initiates of the sixth degree, essentially, lead their instrument to taking the fourth degree. But, I've talked about that before, so there's no sense to go on with it too much at this point. So man is in the grip of his own desires, and Christ said, okay, it's not your desires that count, it's the desires and the good of one's neighbor. Take the emphasis, take your eyes off your own desire body and emphasize the other, thus altruism, and to advise the life of service and self-sacrifice, of self-forgetfulness. See, all of this having to do with the will. These factors having to do with the will which counters desire. Cain kills Abel. Vulcan kills Mars. The shepherd, Abel the shepherd, he's got a lot of sheep. That's Aries, isn't it? Ruled by Mars. So take your eyes off yourself and care about the good of your own neighbor, and live the life ministering to the needs of that neighbor and not ministering to the promptings of your own desire body, and sacrifice what you thought was yourself, which wasn't really yourself at all, but is your own elemental promptings. We can say that. Sacrifice your own elemental promptings to advise the life of service, sacrifice of self-forgetfulness and the love of all beings. So this is the transition of desire into love, and of the solar plexus into the heart center. Only in this way can man's mind and the eye of the heart being the soul, be turned away from one's own needs and satisfaction to the deeper demand of itself, of the race itself. So all this requires self-sacrifice. And this is not the true self sacrificing its nature, it's the true self appearing through the sacrifice of the lesser self, getting it out of the way of the expression of the true self. So instinctively we know, now it's instinctive, having been through the Piscean Age and the Sixth Ray and the era of the Master Jesus with the Christ behind him, having been through that, we know of the necessity that the welfare of another is most important, even in Rule 1, right? His brother's need is of greater moment than his own. This is the truly Christian way. His brother's need is of greater moment than his own. And only when this is the case is the man ready for initiation. Then he will be ready for initiation. And with some other requirements, if he cares not for the suffering and pain of the lower self, if it is immaterial to him whether happiness comes his way or not, to serve the purpose. I almost get stuck on that one. His brother's needs are for him greater than his own, and if his whole life is dedicated to the serving of the purpose, I shouldn't be forgetting that one, should I? So this is really an initiation. Well, the place to go is raise initiation right around page 18 or so, right after that. No. We have to go into initiation, human and solar. That's where we have to go. Okay, initiation, human and solar. Brother's need. Okay, that should be initiation, human and solar, of greater moment than his own. Sole purpose in life is to serve and save the world. There we go. There must be a lesson in that one for me and for all of us who manage to forget certain important phrases. The sole purpose of his life is to serve and save the world. S-O-L-E, soul, S-O-U-L, obviously, the solar self. The sole purpose of his life is to serve and serve the world, and of his brother's need is for him of greater moment than his own. So that's what the Christ is trying to teach us, that literally our brother's need, that's a real reversal, Our brother's need is of greater moment than our own. That's what is being taught. Until a man stands upon the path of perfection, and I suppose by that path of perfection we mean higher, the higher stages of the path of initiation, he cannot really grasp the imperative demand of his own soul for release from the search for the outer, material, tangible satisfaction, and from desire. Well, maybe the path of perfection does here mean something larger, the path as a whole, where the soul is becoming, its voice becoming quite imperative, and the dissatisfaction with time and space is truly realized, that a man knows them too well. Time in its myriad forms I know too well. Space and its life I cannot reach. Time in its myriad forms I know too well. Pendant I hang betwixt the two, desiring neither. But upon this path of perfection, we are driven in a reverse manner, a counterclockwise manner, reversal of the wheel back towards the center of our life. So upon this path of perfection, we realize the nature of the soul, its demand, and we really do follow the path of release from material, tangible satisfaction and from desire. It just fails to make us happy, so joyous. All this is about DD? No, it doesn't say. If I said DD, what would that mean? DD? It's divine design. Okay, but I'll call it DVD. That one will. Every time I want to talk about a DVD, I'll have to deal with divine discontent. Discontent. The present content is not enough. So all of this is about divine discontent. It has been this demand which indicated the soul's need to incarnate and to function for a needed period under the law of rebirth. Well, the only way up is down. So there is this need to pass through the elemental worlds in order to finally be free of them, according to our contract, the monadic contract, we might say. As the work of purification proceeds upon the path of purification, probationary path largely, this demand for release becomes stronger and stronger and clearer. And when a man steps upon the path of discipleship, then the law of repulse can, for the first time, begin to control his reactions. So he is increasingly mentally focused, and some strand of the antikarana has made its way into the higher worlds, beyond the soul per se. Because remember, this is the law that is in a way impulse from the atmic plane, the plane of spiritual will. So this law, in this law of repulse, the spiritual will opposes normal desire. The spiritual will from the atmic plane and the sacrifice petals opposes normal desire. This takes place unconsciously at first. What would we say? Through distaste, the disses, discontent, discomfort. The dis is there, it's a rejecting kind of prefix. It's as if to say, not this, not that. So at first we just become satisfied. But it becomes more potent and more consciously appreciated as the disciple takes one initiation after another with increasingly pointed, focused understanding of the undesirable containment in which he finds himself, of the undesirable in which he finds himself trapped. So not on the path of probation so much, but more on the path of discipleship with its mental will focus, does this first triadal law and fourth law of the soul begin to take place, working from the top down, from the atmic plane down. It is not our intention in this treatise to deal with the development of the undeveloped and unevolved and undeveloped man in connection with these laws of the soul. There will be some effect as he is led towards the conscious appreciation of what these laws are. At first he doesn't know, and when he's forced to sacrifice, he considers it unpleasant. When he's forced to serve, he considers it servitude. When he's forced to be in the group, he considers it compulsion. But he is driven toward a position where he can realize the truer nature of these laws and work with them consciously. I guess, it's called training. And so often, in training, we don't like the friction and the exhaustion. But the old saying, no pain, no gain, I guess is very true of life on our planet. Purifying pain and releasing sorrow and purifying pain. I always get them mixed up, but if I remember PP, it's purifying pain. So I seek only to clear the way of the highly intelligent man and aspirants of the world, maybe aspirants having the emotional quality which takes them a little bit beyond the highly intelligent man, who, and some of the aspirants are not yet highly intelligent, so each has something the other needs. I seek only to clear the way of the highly intelligent man, the aspirants of the world, and the world disciples, and by this we might say disciples in the world, not necessarily world disciples as initiates of the third degree. The process of the undeveloped and the average man can be covered in the following statements, taken sequentially and describing the stages of his progress under the promptings of desire. Is this the... well, maybe not. It's always nice when he makes these lists, because they epitomize for us processes that are taking a long time otherwise, and they help us with our mental grasp. So the urge to experience and to exist and to satisfy the instinctual nature. In a way, it's looking at another list, it's so Oretian. Blind, undirected activity under the instincts, and man is just driven by what his vehicles make him. Experience, grasping, existing, followed by renewed demand for more satisfying compliances of fate or destiny. It's very much to do with the desire body, and as you can see, very Taurian. If we want a scaffolding to hang this on. It doesn't mean that it will always be so, but these first two, when you grasp and when you demand and you want satisfaction, you're treading the way of wrathful satisfaction, as the bull does. You just want things to be more in line with your desires, and that fate shall comply with your desires, or you shall make the circumstance comply with your desires. So, those two anyway. Cycle after cycle of demand for satisfaction, a period of satisfaction of a temporary nature, and then further demands. This is the story of the human race, so we can say always more intense desires, whether higher or lower. Because we cannot say that for everyone it is an immediate ascent. There are those who have traveled very far along the path of negative desire and will have to come back. By what means of reversal? It's hard to say. Experience steadily sought and pursued upon the three planes of human evolution. When I see the word experience, I immediately think Gemini, wanting to experience everything. And, of course, the opposite signs are involved here as well, you know. For the second one, all of that grasping and so forth, it's Taurus Scorpio. Oh, DK gives this, and I've gone over it myself in working through esoteric astrology, where he gives the polarities and how they lead to a condition of realized unhappiness, and how there is a reversal of the wheel back to the originating sign. So more and more, give me more and more experience pursued upon the three planes of evolution, and Gemini is the third sign. Then the same experiences, but this time as an integrated personality, and so the environment is made to better comply with one's demands, and one is more masterful in the experiences. Not so much the just passing through them and maybe sometimes the victim of the experiences, but can actually direct and control them. Well, then we have this demand met until satiety is reached. And there is that, very arresting sentence. I don't know, esoteric astrology around 330. No, that was 330. Yes. This is the light. These are the lights. But maybe a little bit later in the same Cancerian chapter. Here it is. Taurus Scorpio. Powerful, focused, lower desire leads to death and defeat. The triumph of the lower nature, which eventuates in the awakening to satiety and death. This is the parallel. The man is the prisoner of desire, and at the moment of consummation, whatever kind of consummation it may be, consummation of that driving lower desire, knows his prison, and at the moment of consummation knows his prison. Is this all there is? Can I have spent all this for that? How limited this is. Well, everything is limited if you really look at it and try to understand. There's no finite thing which is anything other than like an infinite limitation in the face of the absolute infinity. But that would take us off onto the third ray, and there it is that we must not go too often. These little fugues onto the third ray. So demand is met until satiety is reached, for in time men do eventually achieve that which they demand, and we must really say, for better or for worse. Then comes the demand for inner spiritual compliances, happiness and bliss. So the demand is no longer focused in the outer world. This is what everybody passes through, we must say. And the heaven wish is of many people who are reoriented and no longer finding worldly satisfaction to satisfy that which is awakening within them under the prompting of their inner self, their soul. So the heaven wish becomes powerful, and how many millions are under the influence of the heaven or paradise wish, under the sixth ray, repudiating normal life, under the repudiating normal experience, finding it completely unsatisfying, and working for something they much better that they often imagine and dream up, whether or not it's true. But then, of course, whatever you dream, you will meet with. Although there may be certain restrictions on the way, on the functioning of that with which you meet in the imagined world, or in the world of imagination. Finally, a vague realization that two things are needed: purification and the power to choose a right. It sounds very much like Virgo and Libra, which is right discrimination. So there is a reversing point that occurs in Libra. Now remember, this was written before DK elaborated all this in his esoteric psychology book. This book was written first. But you can already see the outline of what he would there describe. Virgo is the purificatory sign, Libra the sign of choice. And man is beginning to reverse the wheel here, is he not? And a vision of the pairs of opposites which at last more clearly, personality and soul, are seen. And these are vertical pairs of opposites. Sometimes one can get confused thinking of horizontal pairs of opposites, one of which is neither better or worse than the other. It's just the way the world is, compared with the hierarchical pairs of opposites, in which the higher is always existentially superior than the lower, though the lower is needed. A vision of the pairs of opposites. There is, this happens in the second tier of petals of the egoic lotus. We begin to understand that there is a higher power within us, and it is different from the familiar self that we have been, as which we have been living all this time. The realization of the narrow path which leads between these pairs of opposites, because, you can't leap into the soul realm. Cannot leap into the soul realm. You have to give form its due, even while refining oneself away from form, and to reach towards soul. If we try to live only the life of the soul and ignore the form entirely, we will die. It will be an unsuccessful incarnation. And I mean, maybe some mystical lives have ended in futility because one seeks to live only as the higher of the pairs of opposites. So this sometimes enigmatical phrase, finding the narrow path which leads between the pairs of opposites. Of course, from another point of view, there is that which is neither of the pairs of opposites, and that is being itself. So that's another way that perhaps that can be understood. And then discipleship, and the repulsing or repudiation over a long period of time, not just one life, I suspect, of the not self. So this 11-fold list has taken us to the point where desire has morphed into repulsion of that which used to be desired. Interesting that it ends at 11. Does it end at 11? Are there more words there? Maybe not. Ends at 11. Interestingly enough, 11 being the number of the initiate, and Aquarius, and of hierarchy. So by this time we are having a spiritual vision. We know how we must tread toward the higher of the pairs of opposites without ignoring the demands of the lower of the pairs of opposites, killing it, as Hercules did in the sixth labor. We don't want to do that. And gradually the whole thing moves up, So the middle position that you are sustaining is now really the higher position towards which you were previously reaching, and still another higher position exists. So let us... this Law of Repulse is really good, He really is explaining some of the fundamental things, and you have to realize that it's the fourth law, and therefore has to relate strongly to the fourth creative hierarchy in the fourth kingdom. So let's just say this fourth law relates very closely to the fourth kingdom and the fourth creative hierarchy. The two factors so intimate to the human experience. Okay, friends. Well, you know, I'm on a run here where I seem to be doing end of Law of the Soul webinar commentary number 18. I'm sure we're on a page somewhere, aren't we? It looks like page 157. Okay. So this is right, page 157, and beginning of Laws of the Soul webinar commentary number 19, page 157. And we will go on. You know, a little while ago, a year ago, whatever, I leapt right into the Laws of Repulse because the stanzas, because at that time I said, well, I'm not going to read all of this esoteric psychology. I'll do that with the advanced books. But then, of course, this is a profoundly advanced book, really. There's nothing the Tibetan has written that is not really advanced. Even Initiation, Human and Solar, if you read it after having read all the others, you realize how extremely profound it is and how the seed of that which is later to be developed is set down in Initiation, Human and Solar. So, okay. Then we'll go on to number 19 shortly. And, well, it's an important book. See you soon.